Kia ora, I'm Bridget Romains from Mobile Relocation. We work with businesses who are bringing expats into New Zealand, and it's our job to get them settled and established in new lives here. We have this series of expert interviews where we talk to various people around the global mobility community about their specialist areas in order to educate recruiters, HR people, and relocatees themselves about the many facets of relocation. So it's absolutely amazing to have with us today Jess Drucker from the US. Jess is a relocation strategist. Her business is called Rainbow Relocation Strategies, and she has a particular focus and interest on the LGBTQ plus community. So welcome, Jess.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And for us, it's really great to be able to speak with you because most of the businesses we work with have very diverse hiring policies. They're after the most talented people, and they're very cognizant of the need to make sure that the relocation experience is optimal for all communities when they move to New Zealand. So you've got a lot of specialist knowledge, I know, that I'm really excited to be able to tap into today. So let's get started. Now, my first question to you is, because New Zealand is quite a unique global mobility situation here, a lot of people who've moved to New Zealand are relocating here permanently. They're not necessarily traditional expats. But we don't have anything in New Zealand called a relocation strategist. So can you tell me, what is a relocation strategist?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a relocation strategist is a way that I look at relocation. And so for me, what that means for me is I essentially, especially when it comes to working with the LGBTQ community, there's a desire to move abroad and relocate, whether that's for corporate career purposes or lifestyle purposes or for whatever reason that you're relocating. But it does take some strategy work. It takes understanding locations, destinations. Obviously, that is for everyone, but in particular for the queer community, understanding where countries are safe and also what safety looks like in those countries. So what we do is we essentially look at the deep why. Why are you looking to move abroad? And we set like goals and intentions, and like any strategy work, we then map out a plan to get you to your like true goal and your true why. And then of course we work with relocation companies in various countries, and they do the sort of on the ground work, because we can't know every country in the whole wide world ourselves. But really the strategy part is really mapping your why and your goals with your like desires, and then finding the right countries that fit. And then of course looking at being realistic, visas, budget, lifestyle, what you're really looking for, and creating a strategy, which is really just mapping out a step-by-step plan.
Great, perfect. Oh, that's a really clear explanation. And I should also add there that we're really honoured to be the execution end of your strategy when it comes to New Zealand, and that mobile relocation is there to assist your clients once they've worked with you to develop their plan. So that's fantastic. So now,
There goes both ways.
so I thought I'd just ask you a bit about, because everybody in global mobility has great stories, because most of us have lived overseas and done exciting things. What's your story, firstly, and then what drew you to serving the LGBTQ plus community specifically in this relocation field?
Yeah, I mean, I think I will give an abbreviated version of my story.
Give me the
It
highlights.
can be long. Yeah, I mean, I think I was just, growing up, I had no idea about living abroad. I didn't know anything that I had never really met anyone that was not from the suburbs of Chicago. I mean, I did not have any sort of, my parents didn't work abroad or anything like that. Um, and it wasn't until I will get a little specific on this, and I won't be this specific for the rest, but I was actually getting a C, which is a really medium grade in Spanish in high school, and I didn't get C's. It's not something that I was comfortable with. And I said, how do I get an A? And my teacher said, there's no way you're going to get an A unless you host a Costa Rican as part of the exchange program. Never had this occurred to me before. And then all of a sudden, Fabio was living in my house. I knew nothing about Costa Ricans, especially Costa Rican high school boys. When I was in high school, I didn't know anything about that. And it changed my life. I mean, just living with someone who was so different to me, and yet we got along so well. The whole group of them that came, we cried when they left. We went to Costa Rica to complete the exchange. It was so wonderful and enlightening to me. And it just changed my whole life. First of all, it made me completely fluent in Spanish very quickly, and I found that I had language skills. But understanding not only like being able to express myself, but to really understand a culture in their native language was just became fascinating to me. So, I lived in Costa Rica, then I lived in Guatemala for 2 years. I moved to Germany for 3 years, moved to the UK for 4 years, and then I ended up becoming a digital nomad when people still didn't like that term and they thought that it was not a cool term. They thought it was annoying. But I was a digital nomad also for 4 years. So I all in basically lived abroad for about 15 years. And I did some of that was doing a master's degree. Some of it was studying, some of it was working, sort of a typical as an English teacher. And then I also did work in tourism and other work in that sort of field. And then when I was nomadic, I ran a travel blog, and it was pre-influencer, so I wasn't like an influencer. It was just before being an influencer, but I probably would have been. And how did I get to LGBTQ specifically, working with queer expats? So basically, my 10,000 hours in life come from working or being an expat, working with expats. I mean, it's sort of like where I've been. I have the most experience, and I started working, sort of helping people, advising people on moving abroad. But I found myself feeling so differently. I mean, I'm obviously part of the LGBTQ community, but when I would be working with people of a certain privilege who maybe were wealthy, perhaps they were white and heterosexual, not having to think about, they could just kind of go wherever they wanted to. And that's wonderful. And, congratulations. But it wasn't as fulfilling to me because it almost like, I felt that the whole world was sort of geared toward them. Like the whole world of relocation and global mobility was set up for those folks. And then I would work with queer people, and it would be like, a multiracial family, and they would be queer. And it's like, we want to leave here, but we don't know where to go. And it felt much more important and much more personal to me to do that kind of work. And so I said, you know what, at the risk of maybe shutting out a large part of a market, I'm going to focus specifically on this niche. And it turns out that, it's a full niche of people, and it has been a real honor to start serving specifically that group of people over the last few years.
Thanks, Jess. That's a really interesting story. I do think that the most talented global mobility people are the ones who've actually lived the experience themselves. And I'm also interested in, essentially what you were saying there is that there's a systems issue, and that the systems are essentially set up for what you might call the majority, and that you are massaging those systems and meeting the needs for a specific community. And I think that's a really quite a powerful way of looking at it. So I wanted to ask you at this point, looking at that from a systems perspective, what are 3 sort of top strategies that you'd recommend for LGBTQ plus clients when dealing with a system that meets some but certainly not all of their needs around relocation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, first of all, why, what's your motivating factors for moving abroad? Like you said, New Zealand is a little bit of a less traditional relocation in terms of like corporate or career relocation. But just in general, looking at, first of all, really like, where can you go that you're going to feel if part of your motivation, especially for like people that, leaving the US at this particular point in time, but like, if your part of your motivation is to find a place where you feel safe and secure, well, then you need to really educate yourself on what countries are the safest and most secure for the LGBTQ community, and what does that actually mean? Sometimes, and for a lot of people, it means, is same-sex marriage legal? Are your rights actually codified into like a constitution or a political system? But also just like, what's the social feeling around the LGBTQ community? It's not only like the legal or political realm, but also the social realm. How codified is it into society? So that's, if that's your motivation, then safety and security, like you have to, unfortunately, the LGBTQ community has to educate ourselves a lot of the time.
Exactly. That's sort of top of my mind. I mean, you can get endless country reports about, quality of living or cost of living or anything else. But, finding that LGBTQ plus lens on a country must be quite complex.
Yes, and it's also not one that, say a global mobility team might be as knowledgeable about, right? I mean, they have to know the whole world and all of the rules and regulations of the company and the relocation work. And, it's hard for them to also know specifically all the LGBTQ information as well. And so we do have to inform ourselves a lot. So one, I think defining what safety looks like for you, if that's a motivation, and you've got to be aware of that. The The second thing that's, really important in terms of strategy, and this isn't only for career folks, but like getting realistic on your visa options in the places that you want to relocate to. And specifically for our community, it's also, if there are spousal visas or family reunification visas, does your same-sex marriage qualify? Does it count? Can you relocate with your partner? Not only your partner, but also your spouse, but also your kids. How safe are your kids? Does everybody need to be named on a birth certificate? What is that relocation process like? And a lot of times, the things that we're doing are sort of precedent setting. It's like, we don't know, like this hasn't maybe been done before, or, maybe it has, but there's not that much information. So maybe you're finding one or two people that have done it before, like you. And so, but finding as much information as you can about that family reunification specifically, or bringing your whole family abroad with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's key. Family is just such an important part, or making the move as a family. Often, particularly if you're going for a role, your employer at worst would only be interested in you, whereas the success of any relocation is determined by the successful resettlement of the family. I think we're probably in agreement on that.
Yes, 100%. And then, when it comes to that as well, I think it's sort of, just speaking specifically for a career or for like a corporate expat, I think also, and this is one of the really tricky points that I work with corporates on a lot, is like, what is the policy for if we are facing, for example, homophobia, if our kids are facing that, or transphobia, when we relocate, or even, me as the corporate employee being relocated, what are your policies around if I'm facing like discrimination just based on my LGBTQ status in the workplace? What are your policies for me coming out and living out? And then if I'm facing any sort of, problems because of that, understanding those policies, but also getting the company to clarify those policies is incredibly important for any successful.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, thank you.
I think that was great.
Yeah, that'll do. That was all very rich. I mean, and I think there's enough work in those two, let alone any others that you might suggest. So we've talked. You've sort of glanced on New Zealand a little bit, but why do you think LGBTQ plus folks consider New Zealand as an option?
Well, I mean, besides the stereotypes of like active lesbians, which is a big one. No, I'm just having fun. But I mean, I think first of all, it's obviously a very welcoming environment. I think we know that socially, culturally, as well as politically and legally, it's a safe space for LGBTQ people. I know anecdotally a couple of people who they wanted to get as far away from their like far right Christian family members as humanly possible, and New Zealand is very far away from North America, and part of it is that it's really relocating to a place that does put geographical boundaries between you and maybe those who don't agree with your lifestyle. I don't want to say that, but and that really matters because you can really find yourself and make a life for yourself, really irrespective of people back home, because the distance is truly there. I think New Zealand is beautiful and rich. And obviously, I mean, when you're thinking about a place to relocate, really so many of the factors that we would look for in our like sort of Venn diagram are why, all those things in the middle. I mean, New Zealand's really got all of them. It's healthy. I think, especially from North America, the US specifically, we're looking to find healthy ingredients and a lifestyle that actually allows us to live comfortably. And, active lifestyle, a lot of the sort of exact opposites of what I think we're sort of living in here. I think we can find in New Zealand.
That distance one is interesting because I would say probably at least 75% of our clients regard the distance as an issue. They think it's too far away from their friends and family. But if you look at it through the lens of, needing to create a new life and wanting to be far away, again, it's that different lens that the queer folks have when looking at relocation. I think that's quite a good example of it. So, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And then 70% of our business is working directly with corporates. We do, the other 30% is private clients. So I'm always interested to feed back to my corporate clients as to what they can do to actively, I think, recruit talent that is part of the community, or if they are already recruiting, how can they support LGBTQ plus folks when they have taken a role in New Zealand? What can we be asking them to do, the employers?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it sort of starts with where along the relocation or the global mobility chain that we're looking, right? I mean, I think when you're talking about just things like job postings, right? I think up until now, global mobility has really relied a lot on shoulder tapping, on choosing people who have already relocated, and then you're sort of leaving out an entire group of people who perhaps haven't even considered that as an option before. Like I said, no one in my family ever worked abroad or had an international career. And when you rely on shoulder tapping or sort of pulling from the same network of people, you're excluding a lot of folks, and that really is a lot of LGBTQ people. So it really depends. So if we're talking about like, where are you posting your jobs? Are you posting them transparently throughout the organization? Are they discoverable when searching for jobs internally? And also, how are you, of course, writing those job descriptions, on LinkedIn or on your job search websites? And so, that's a part of global mobility that a lot of times the GM folks can't really affect, right? That's way before the person actually comes to them. So I think when I'm talking specifically to like global mobility teams who are doing the work of relocation, one, and this is something kind of simple, but it does take a lot of work. I hear from clients like, we can't ask. So we can't ask if you're gay. We can't ask, and of course, right, you actually cannot ask. But, you can do things like using inclusive language from the start. And, I've said this a million times before, but like, if you say to me, and this happens all the time, whether it's at work or, at the doctor, and what does your husband do? If you automatically assume that I have a husband or that a man has a wife, now I've got to make some decisions right away. I'm uncomfortable. I'm on my heels. I know that you're not as open as I might like, or maybe you are, but you've just said this thing now. And I'm like, do I have to come out? Is now the time? Am I safe? And so now I'm gone. Like I'm deciding, or I've just completely taken my own personal needs and taken them out of our conversation, and I'm going to have to handle it all myself. So just by using inclusive language, you'd be amazed at, if you say spouse, like the level of calm that comes over anyone in the community is very nice. Trying not to make those assumptions. It takes work. It does take training. I know there's like quite a big DEI backslide at the moment. People are sort of feeling a little bit, anti-DEI, which is only achievable through a position of privilege. You can only be sick of DEI if you are not a part of a community that relies on it. But, really just trying to use inclusive language and making somebody feel as open as possible. Now, at the same time, just having as much information as possible written somewhere that is shared and being as transparent as possible is incredibly helpful. So not only with like having transparent policies, but also for every country, including New Zealand, give me a workup of, what is the LGBTQ community like? How safe am I? Where does it rank in terms of world rankings of peace and safety and LGBTQ safety and trans safety? If you just have that information available, like in internal communications where I can just find it and click on it myself, I know that A, you probably are more supportive, and B, I can handle it myself without feeling like I need to come out to you. So those are just a few examples, but I think it's really important to always consider transparency and just using sort of like neutral and inclusive language, at least to start.
Yeah, thank you. Those are really practical suggestions. And I guess you raised a really interesting point there around the sort of nexus between privacy and relocation, which I think is an issue for all communities, because for any successful relocation, there has to be an element of trust that goes on between an employer and a global mobility team, even people like us, because it is a very personal journey. It's not just going to another office in the same city. You're actually shifting a whole life to another country. Do you have any comments to make on that sort of generally, or in relation to the queer community?
Yeah, I mean, of course, of course it is. You're changing your entire life for a job.
Yeah.
In that way, right? And so, of course, it's an incredibly private experience that you're having with your global mobility teams and your relocation teams, right? And so I think, when it comes to the queer community, I think it's important to know, and I really mean this. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to pretend like you. It'd be better to not say like, I know where the gay clubs are in the city. Like, okay, cool, but that's nice. But it's more just about being able to say what you don't know. So if you do discover that someone is gay, you don't have to be like, oh, I know I have a gay aunt, or that's not what we need. It's actually better to ask questions. What makes you nervous? How can I help in this way? Asking some questions, being inquisitive, being honest about what you don't know, that's actually more inclusive. Because sometimes if you say something like, my aunt's gay, it's like, you're also creating distance. But being inquisitive and being like, okay, great. So what does your spouse do? What are some of your concerns? That's actually better. So I think not trying to know everything, but rather being open to learning is honestly makes all the difference for the expats.
Yeah, that's excellent, and I'm definitely going to be highlighting that too. We work with a lot of recruiters. New Zealand's quite unique in the sense that not many of our companies have specific global mobility teams. Often we're working directly with recruiters, and I know that they, in general, are very cognizant of the well-being of the individual and their whole family. But yeah, perhaps they just need to take the kind of approach that you've suggested and just be curious and open, and that will help them achieve the goals for the individual who's coming to New Zealand and also for their organisation. So
yeah, and I also think there's a few great resources out there, to look at. I mean, there are those sort of peace indexes, and there are rankings through different websites, and we can include those if you'd like after in some of the copy. But just keeping an eye on the resource, just knowing a few things, understanding sort of politically what's going on with the queer community in New Zealand. Just having like an overview is really helpful. It gives you a language as well. But that's helpful, but definitely not necessary.
Yeah. And in fact, as you speak, I'm going to ask you if you've got anything to sort of round off with, but I'm also thinking for my recruitment and HR network who are watching this, following you, actually, listening to your podcasts and your work, certainly for me, it's been really beneficial because it's tuned me into a whole set of issues that I, due to my situation, are just not aware of. And opens your mind. So that's certainly something that I would personally recommend to anyone who's listening. So anyway, over to you, Jess. Anything you want to kind of round off with here?
Yeah, what she said. Yeah, follow me. No.
That too.
I mean, of course, it is a very specific space that we're filling, and I don't know of any others that are doing this kind of work in exactly this way. And so we have a lot to build and a lot of content to build, obviously. But working with you, and you were of course, on my podcast called the Adventure Calls podcast. But the way that you are so open to it and learning about it, and you have been so receptive, and that's all that's necessary, and like, look at the way you said, now you're just sort of like attuned to it. You're not an expert in it. You don't have to be. But that's been really a joy. And so thank you for obviously for doing that. I think in terms of resources, there are a few. Asher and Ferguson is a married couple, and they do great research, not only on LGBTQ work, but they put out this sort of index, this annual index of from least safe to most safe countries in terms of the LGBTQ community. And they also just started a trans safety index as well. They put hundreds of hours into it, and so I'm not going to replicate it. They're doing it, so I think that they're a great resource for that. They've been putting it out about the last 2 or 3 years, and I can share a link with you there. There's a great organization and a website called EqualDex, and it's basically like an index of equality around the world, and it's looking at it through the LGBTQ lens, and you can look through. There's like different tags. So of course, same-sex marriage. There's horrible things to look at, like trans murders, and like that might be a metric that you look at as well. That's actually also included in the Asher and Ferguson work as well, unfortunately. But there's different tags to look at, so you can sort of understand the world through a lot of different LGBTQ lenses. So EqualDex is another really good one. And then honestly, I think there, even looking at LGBTQ travel content can be helpful. Just to understand, I mean, obviously, the more developed of a queer tourism industry that a country has, it doesn't mean it's not the same as relocating. We know that, even though every time we travel, we want to live there, but that's different.
That's us. That's us, Jess.
Yeah. but it's a good indicator. So, you know, IGLTA or other international gay and lesbian organizations can also be useful just to sort of understand that. And then your country probably also has information on various countries around the world. The U.S. State Department does look at LGBTQ safety in different countries around the world. So those are some resources as well.
Fantastic. You have so much knowledge, Jess. So I really want to thank you very much for giving us your time today. I've had quite a lot of contact with you, but I've even learned more in this 20-minute conversation. So I'm sure there's a lot more to learn. We will be, obviously, this episode will be going out on our website, www.mobile-relocation.com, and also be circulated on LinkedIn, and Jess is going to share us some links and things which will be there for people to use as well. And of course, I guess people can contact you directly. How do they do that, Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is rainbowrelo.com, so rainbow RELO.com. On Instagram, we're also Rainbow Relo. And you can reach out to me directly. You can use the contact form on the site and it will come directly to me as founder. So that's a good way to get in touch. Also on LinkedIn, I assume you'll probably tag me on LinkedIn. Feel free to DM me there as well.
Cool, great. Yeah, no, LinkedIn's always a good way to quickly get in touch with people, isn't it? Wonderful. Okay, well, thanks so much, Jess. And look forward to continuing engagement with you and learning more.
Same, yeah. Thank you so much. I really have enjoyed this so much. So it's been great to do these interviews with you.